Hey everybody, welcome to this video. My name is Dan Richardson. I'm an actor and an animal conservationist, and I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Philip Lymbery, the CEO of Compassion in World Farming and a lifelong birder and international wildlife guide. Philip, how are you doing?
Very well, Dan. Great talking to you. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Yeah, really good, and enjoying the wildlife right outside my window. And, you know, I'm just really fascinated to know, with you having been a lifelong birder and leading international wildlife tours, what kind of contrasts do you see from those early days to the countryside that you see today?
Well, Dan, yeah, I mean, I started watching wildlife, being interested in wildlife from a very early age, feeding birds in my grandfather's garden in Bedford, all the way to being taken on holiday by my parents to Norfolk. And I remember specifically one of the days when they dropped me at this place that I'd never heard of before called Titchwell, RSPB, a wonderful reserve that I then ended up working at for 6 months as a volunteer. And whilst I was there as this, rookie teenage enthusiast, it was the middle of the day and it was a blistering hot day. It must have been about June time. And I remember looking through the heat haze and seeing this shimmering, this white shimmering. And I thought, my goodness, that's a ghost. And then I thought, no, it's a barn owl. It's a barn owl. But it couldn't be a barn owl because it's in the day and they're night birds. But thankfully, my teenage angst was dispelled when the warden, a fantastic guy called Norman Sills, came along and put me out of my misery and said, yep, that's a barn owl. The reason why he or she is out in the middle of the day is because they've got chicks. And I was hooked. And since then, I've been out, every weekend, every spare minute, looking at birds and wildlife. I became a twitcher, became a tour leader, taking people to places like Seychelles, Costa Rica, and the Spanish Pyrenees. It was a hard life, Dan.
It sounds like it.
But what I didn't realize, 70s, 80s, into the 90s, was that the object of my fascination, birds and wildlife, over much of the country, over much of the countries that I was visiting, were disappearing before my very eyes. Birds like the barn owl, like the skylark,
Right.
a farmland species that also include grey partridges, replaced by red-leg partridges, the game bird over much of the country. Turtle doves, corn buntings went into seismic decline. And it was essentially something which has also been paralleled on other continents. Species like the jaguar in South America have been in decline. And what I've recently discovered is that even in Asia, the critically endangered Sumatran elephant, they've been declining. And there's a common thread between the declines in once common farmland birds and wonderful charismatic mammals like the jaguar and like this Sumatran elephant. And that's our food and the way it's produced. Factory farming, the industrial production of food where animals are taken from the land, put into cages and crates, and which looks like a space-saving idea, but actually isn't, because you then have to use vast acreages of land elsewhere to grow their food using chemical monocultures, artificial fertilizers. And in so doing, what you essentially do is wipe away vast tracts of habitat, huge quantities of wildlife, and birds like barn owls, skylarks, on other continents, jaguars and elephants, they just go into a tailspin. They disappear.
It's terrifying to think. And where do you think it's all gone wrong for the birds and wildlife that we're talking about?
Well, I think it's gone wrong because after the Second World War, we introduced this intensive way of producing food, chemical pesticides, artificial fertilizers, cages and crates for animals. We essentially separated farmed animals from the land. That was where it went wrong.
Right.
We started to put them more and more into cages, which causes unimaginable cruelty, separating from the land, essentially disconnecting farming from nature. And so nature has been pushed to the margins. The nature reserve that I worked on at Titchwell, RSPB, as a reserve warden, as a volunteer for 6 months, that was very much an island, a beacon, a solace for wildlife in what was becoming an increasingly green desert of farmland all around. And it's been a trend that's continuing.
And that affects the entire ecosystem, doesn't it? I mean, it's obvious with the larger wildlife and the birds, but this has an impact all the way down to the insects and everything else in the entire ecosystem, doesn't it? And it's incredibly damaging.
Absolutely. I mean, it's linked to some of the biggest challenges facing humanity. You know, once you put animals into cages and crates, once you start to use chemical fertilizers and pesticides and things of this nature, what happens is the fields get bigger, the trees and the bushes start to disappear. The chemical fertilizers, the chemical pesticides ensure that essentially the insects like bees start to disappear, as well as the wild flowers and the seeds that are needed by the birds, the bats and the bees and just about everything else, until you're left with the crop. And then the crop is fed to farmed animals, who then waste the vast majority of the food value of that crop in conversion to meat, milk and eggs. If you want me to quantify that transaction globally in terms of feeding grain to factory farmed animals, we waste enough food to feed an extra 4 billion people on the planet. And what that's actually doing is undermining our ability to produce food in the future. You were showing the picture of the bumblebee. Bumblebees have been going into serious decline. And why is that serious? I think there's many of us now are very clearly knowing a third of all of the food that we produce relies for its very existence on pollinating insects like the bumblebee. Right. And those bumblebees are in steep decline in many countries, in Britain, across Europe, in America, and way beyond, India, China.
Right.
And this is threatening the future of our food. So, you know, wildlife is the bellwether, essentially. It's the essential element in the ecosystem that we need for the production of our food. And as wildlife declines, be it birds, bees, or animals such as jaguars and elephants, what's happening is, you know, their decline is pointing to a decline in our ability to produce food in the future.
It's the implications of all of this that you're talking about, it's absolutely catastrophic, isn't it? I mean, this isn't a minor thing.
It is major. I mean, it is about life on Earth, about planet Earth. And, you know, I've got a short video that summarizes some of these issues, Dan, if you'd like to see that.
Let's have a look, yeah.
Planet Earth, a rich, diverse biosphere of awe-inspiring wonder. Sadly, our incredibly poor management of the natural world is now having detrimental and irreversible effects. And the most damaging of all is the mass production and consumption of cheap meat known as factory farming, a destructive form of farming that is causing devastating damage to our planet.
Factory farming is the ultimate out of sight, out of mind. The animals are behind closed doors, and the meat and milk that comes from those factory farms is labelled in ways which disguise the truth.
Industrial agriculture is the root cause for ecosystems to collapse, wildlife becoming extinct, and huge areas of land and sea lifeless.
This is one of the world's biggest dead zones. Pollution is coming from upriver, from industrial agriculture, here into the Gulf of Mexico, and killing it.
Wake up. Time is running out. We have to end factory farming now. Future generations will not judge us kindly if we don't stop factory farming.
You don't see any single farm animal because they are all factory farmed. They live confined in sheds and they have really little space. They will never see a blade of grass for all their lives.
Few people realise that there is a direct link with animal extinction and consumer demand for cheap meat. Right now, the world's focus is very much on climate change and how to solve it. However, we must act immediately on another potent threat to life on Earth, which is sadly also caused by us.
There's some pretty harrowing images in there, and I'm really interested to know, Philip, you're an absolute get things done kind of guy. This is your job, and in order to do that, you have to take a very rational approach to all of the issues that you address. But I'm really fascinated to know you as an individual, and a clearly compassionate, kind, and caring individual. How does all this make you feel?
On bad days, it makes me feel, really, really sad at what's happening in the natural world. But what also gives me cause for great hope and optimism is the fact that we can put it right. There is a simple, elegant solution to all of this, and that is ending factory farming, restoring farm animals to the land, taking the pressure off the system, which actually means reducing the amount of meat and dairy that we produce and consume, and making sure that any that we do produce is produced in harmony with nature, which means putting the animals back on the land, rearing them in mixed rotational systems where they can be in pastures or woodland edges, part of crop rotations. And in this way, we can actually bring wildlife flooding back. And I actually live here on a farm in West Sussex, and I can see what happens when farming is done much more in harmony with nature. It's transformative, Dan.
So this is what essentially people can do to help to put this situation right and to bring birds and wildlife flooding back. They can actually have an impact on that in the way that you've just described.
Absolutely. We all have the power through our food choices. And, we've for decades now have said support organizations like the RSPB and the BTO. And I've done that, and I still do that with a passion, as well as my own organization, of course, Compassion in World Farming. I think the other thing we can all do 3 times a day is seize control through our food choices by eating less and better meat, by eating more plants, and ensuring that any meat and dairy that we do have comes from animals that are treated better in harmony with nature. So pasture fed, free range or organic. In this way, we really can make a difference for our families, for the farm animals, and for the wildlife, which, as goes to the Birdfair, we all are so fascinated and in love with.
Well, Philip, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights about this subject, and also for helping us to understand how we can all help and make a positive impact on this situation. And keep up the fantastic work. We really need you.
Dan, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Philip.